Hello, today we're going to look at the question of short power, and it's something we've looked at a little bit. I've mentioned it. It is very much in the intermediate category, so we'll look at it a lot more in the intermediate course that I'm filming at the moment, and how to use it with more power and how to use it inspiring and things like that. But today we can look at expanding our understanding of the concept conceptually, and a few little exercises maybe that we can practice to help us understand it physically, which is obviously the most important thing in each, well, say the most important. Understanding it conceptually and understanding it physically are the yin yang of each one method. And the first thing to say about that then is that the term short power really is just that. It's just a term, and there's people using that idea across a range of martial arts, and they might be applying it to something that's completely legitimate, completely valid concept or technique. They just happen to be using that term, and it can be quite confusing because people are using the same term for different things. So how do we decide, well, this is what we're talking about, or this is a valid concept within each one? And I think the answer to that is always the same. To look at each one, although it's got lots and lots of potential for creativity, and there's lots and lots of things that still haven't been explored, lots and lots of things that people can still work on. Nevertheless, it's all unfolding around a curriculum that has a kind of internal structure to it. It's like this constantly unfolding, what we've talked about before as the infinite curriculum, having this kind of logic to it, that everything pieces together step by step like Lego bricks. And it's there's lots of misunderstandings around the idea of intuitive progression. You can't intuit an entire science. You've got to work with concepts and ideas developed by other people to save you time. But nevertheless, the way we intuitively progress is by recognizing this logical structure to the thing itself and the way that it unfolds. And that means that every tier of training leads into the next tier of training, and you can see why you did it, and you can see why something connects to the training that you've done all the way through. And we very often don't get that when people are explaining each one, and I don't want to say why that is. People can, and it's not always, for example, just that people don't know or that they're kind of grasping at straws. It can be that their teaching is commodified, so they don't tell you everything. But the problem then that emerges is that you can be presented with ideas and they're just kind of on their own, and you think, well, what does this idea mean? How do I connect it into my overall training? And I saw a very good example of this recently. Someone had posted, and it speaks very much to what we want to talk about today and some of the concepts around short power. There's a video of Yao Cheng Wang, and he's doing this kind of posture where his hands pretty much stay where they are, and he's hyper articulating his body around You can do it either way, doesn't make any difference. We should do it both ways, in fact. And he's explaining some stuff about the way you use the core and the way you articulate your movement. And someone's posted and just posted the video and given the Chinese name for the posture, and then someone else has posted and given the name of the posture in Chinese. And you think, well, why not just explain the posture? What is it about? So this is an idea I've talked about before, that using the Chinese terms is a kind of like a priestly caste, using Latin to kind of keep everyone else excluded. And you can change the size of the posture, like a priestly caste, and they're just keeping everyone else excluded, and they're kind of virtue signaling, well, I know the name, I just wonder, why is that helpful? Where's the explanation? But when you do that, you maroon that posture kind of in the middle of nowhere. What's he doing? Why is he doing it? What's the reason for this? And I'm not sure why anyone would be that unhelpful, or is it that you just don't know? Why? So to understand the posture, you've got to understand the whole idea of the Yiquan curriculum, and you've got to kind of understand it conceptually as well as physically if you want to explain what's going on with this kind of movement. And someone else had posted actually saying it's taking a movement to the extreme, and again with no real explanation. Yeah, it is. Actually, it's fine to take movements to extreme, and this speaks to the idea that movements can be for all kinds of things in each one. It's very good for like a kind of yoga, for physical movements, to take these postures to what we call hyper articulation. And then you also need them much smaller like that, because what this posture is for is articulating movement to push someone. And when you watch that video, you can see that Yao Chengguang doesn't really move his hands. And that's because the posture is for, if your hands are on someone, then you want to push them. You've got to create space, you've got to create volume. There's no magic power that you're just going to transmit. And this then opens up into conceptual understanding that there's different ways of using Fa Li. And the two most important ways, I mean, we can talk about them as separate and pretend it's that simple for the moment. It's not. You can, like with everything in each one, you can compound it, do hybrid versions, and there's also just some other more advanced and technical versions. But you can conceptually break it into two different kinds of Fa Li at first, so that people can understand it clearly. And it's as simple as this. There's a difference if you've got your hands on someone or if there's a gap. There's a difference in how you can use Fa Li in those circumstances. If there's a gap, no matter how small, you can use this kind of, we'll just call it in plain English, gap Fa Li. And what that means is you can get the acceleration of the movement into the push. And the gap can be absolutely tiny, but because the whole body is moving like a very small amount, using this kind of scrape Fa Li, scrape routing, because even with a tiny gap, because the whole body is moving, you can get power into a movement just from a very, very small gap. That changes. You can't get that acceleration if your arm is on something. You can't get that acceleration in the same way. So that's the same posture, but the effect is totally different because you don't get that impact. The effect is different just from having that little bit of a gap. And once we've disappointed our expectations that what we're dealing with is some kind of magical chi force and this idea of inner force, and we've replaced that with what the Wushu masters in the past were really talking about when they talked about inner force, which is like the inner forces of the body. The thing that Wang Xiangjia is talking about, the way that the body itself uses its physical structure to generate power. Once we start seeing it like that, it opens up the doorway, and then we think, okay, so we can't get that kind of acceleration if there's no gap. If we have to brace against something, we just can't get that acceleration. It's like, yeah, you can sprint, but put your hands on the wall and then sprint. You can't, because the wall is stopping you, obviously. So you can't get that acceleration. And that acceleration has to take place, like, it can be a tiny, tiny little space like that, but there's got to be a space. Very good example of that is if you go and watch videos of Chen Ziqiang, who does Chen Tai Chi, and when he's doing push hands, which is a lot more wrestling based in Chen Tai Chi, it's very fun with this posture where, like in Chen Tai Chi push hands, people very often end up like chest to chest to release force from his shoulder. You can always see that he pulls back a little bit like that to create the little gap for the Fa Li. You need that little gap to create acceleration. If your shoulder is actually on the target, you can't get that acceleration. So you have to change the way that you do Fa Li, and what you do is you move that space to a different part of the body. And we've talked about this idea before. It interrelates with all the key ideas that we've talked about, like articulated force, storing force. So I know there's lots of misunderstandings around the idea of storing force, but all it means is to create the potential to release force. So Wang Xiangjia talks about this, for example, like even the hands being curled so that even the fingers are storing force, i.e. he talks about it being curled to store force. So the body is rounded with this bow concept, and what we're doing in a posture like this is, look here at this point where we widen this angle around the arms, just creating more potential for force. So we're articulating that space that we would normally create Fa Li with. We're putting that space in our bodies. We're creating volume, what we call volume. We're making the movement bigger. And again, we've got to get this contradictory idea that, yeah, small movement is better than big movement, but within that small movement, we create as much movement as we possibly can through screwing force, through articulated movement, to make the posture as big as we can. It's exactly what you see when you see someone in Yiquan lean over like that. I've talked before about that's not it's overdetermined. You can say in one sense it might be avoiding a punch. Actually, it makes your movement very predictable, as I've talked about before. If in each one person is leaning over like that, they're pretty much always hitting with the opposite hand, which is very, very predictable movement. But what it does do is it creates more volume, makes the posture bigger. We've talked about that a lot. I don't need to rehearse it too much. But when we want to issue force with contact farley, we've got to articulate and brace. So we articulate the posture and then we can release force, because we've created this stored force that we can then release. So we've made the posture bigger. We've moved that little gap from gap farley into the body, and it's there. And that's all that posture is. That's all that Yao Chen Wang is doing in that posture. He's practicing one version of doing that. It's actually not the preferred way. If you're going to push forwards, usually you push forwards this way like that, and Yao Chen Wang himself will usually push like that. That's maximizes force because of the alignment of the body back down to so you can set the posture and make the posture much more solid like that. Again, it doesn't mean that the force is really coming from the ground. This idea that people use all the time, you can feel when you do it. And even with the idea that people should be very familiar with, of the car suddenly braking, whether you use this kind of scrape routine or whether you use the foot on the spot like that, you can feel that the power is coming from the torso area of the body in the way that you're using farley, and the back foot and the front foot are setting the posture, but actually there's not that much push coming from the back leg. Like, it's not even as much push as that you would do to jump. So the idea that power is coming from that is a little bit superstitious. And this idea of articulating our movement in contact farley, when you're in contact with someone and you've got to issue force, articulating movement to put that little gap into the body also begins to determine whether we move our foot or not when we do scrape rooting. So you'll have seen some people, they do it like this, and some people just do it like that. That's not just it's not just like a personal preference. When you come to push an object, you can feel that usually the rule is, if there's a gap and you're using gap farley, you use a scrape rooting like that. Whereas if it's articulated, you usually don't. You usually leave the foot where it is to push, and that begins to again talk to this idea of an integrated curriculum. Everything links together, and when you start seeing it, more importantly, when you try it on people can argue about it. The moment they get on the heavy bag and try and do it or try and push someone, their body will tell them that it's true. It's one of the ways that we can think about each one as being natural. It's like it's not, it's half natural, half cultural, but it's in harmony with the laws of physiology and the laws of physics. You can feel it yourself in your body. You can't argue with the truth. You can't bully it. You can't intimidate it. You can't defame it. It'll still be true. Well, you can, but it'll still be true afterwards, and your body will know that it's true when you do it. So that helps to determine whether you're going to use that kind of scrape rooting or whether you're going to use just like that. And you'll see, like, lots of famous Yiquan people do both, and you think, well, what's that for? Why are they, which one is it? And actually, it's not determined by just arbitrary measures. If there's gap farley, usually you want that little to help create the momentum. The more it's kind of contact or brace farley. I usually use the term brace farley rather than contact because it's a little bit less confusing. Brace farley, because you usually do, by the way, have to, like at this point, you kind of brace and take the weight before you then release force into that. So you brace it and you then go, but it happens in such a split second that it compounds the whole movement. Again, that's a little bit more advanced, something I really need. Well, there's videos of me doing it on a heavier bag, but something I really need to demonstrate on a much heavier bag. And that's what determines whether you're going to do that kind of routing or not. So it's also another important conceptual upgrade. So usually we do it this way, and the Kwa does like a little, again, it's intermediate concept. Like you can see there's a little bit of like somatic timing there, where the actual side of my Kwa is doing Fa Li, like that to power the movement. The Kwa comes back and then forward like that. And in the video of Yao Chengguang, he's explaining this, that you do this with the Kwa. But you don't need to speak Chinese, and you don't need to know the Chinese term. Your body will know it once you get to that point. I mean, I know by the way, that it can be very useful, like in an international community, you've got to have some standard terms for things, like Latin is used in science, and, you know, sometimes, you know, the Mandarin word might be the best word to use, but each one's all about clarity. It's about ending all secrets. It's about opening all doors and sharing information and ideas with everyone. So just giving the Chinese name and not explaining the concept, I don't see how that's helping the community. So when we do it like that, and the Kwa does like a little bit of a Fa Li on it, so, but this way is just like a little bit different, where you go around, and you can probably see there straight away there's a difference in, usually if you're doing it this way, if your left foot's forward and you do it that's more like someone's got hold of your wrist and you pull them back like that, or you pull someone back like that, which you can, well, I mean, there's infinite possible things you can change from the my legs releasing force on its own. I did that the other day. I was asleep on the sofa with the dog, and I was dreaming about hitting the bag. I've been hitting the bag that much. I was dreaming about it, and I released force in my sleep and hit the dog. The dog jumped off the sofa. I mean, I didn't hit him with any real power. My dream. That will happen, by the way. That's something that starts happening. Your body starts like doing kind of mini Fa Li in the sleep and stuff like that. It's quite interesting. So if I'm gonna push round this way, and you know, the reason to practice it is, well, you want to be able to use your body in any circumstance or situation, and the situation could very much conceivably occur where you need to articulate this way rather than this way. But if you're pulling this way, it's usually like to pull back like that. And if you're articulating that way, it's usually to push out that way or that way. But you can't get that just by looking at someone doing this. The only thing you can really get is that the hands are kind of staying in the same place. And that just kind of gives it away that why you're hyper-articulating this movement is that you'll be getting as much force as you possibly could. And then you can change that. I mean, it's useful to do the movement big in itself, just because it's good for the body. It's a good workout in itself with the right kind of combination of relaxation and tension. But it's also good because you might want to do that and expand it. Even though it's hyper articulated, you might want to do that because you might want to compound the movement, like Fa Li that way, and then change into the or palm this way, or whatever it is you want to do. You might want to, that little movement there, you know, if you're doing it this way, could be just moving someone's arms and change into the punch or whatever. This movement could be hitting someone's arm out that way and changing that way. So there's reasons why you also want to do it big, and then there's reasons why you also want to do it like really, really small, like you've just got your hand on someone, or they're just holding on to you, and you just want to move them a tiny little bit. And it doesn't need to be, I mean, I'll talk about this idea much more in the intermediate class, because it is an intermediate idea and we really need to focus on basics in this class. The idea of escalating the posture, so from a small little movement like that, just moves them off balance a tiny little bit, and then you change and you do it again, and it amplifies the movement, and you escalate the unbalancing of the person till usually within 3 moves you hit them. So it's a very different way of thinking about the idea of attacking someone with 3 moves and winning in 3 moves, which people always interpret as like, well, I want to hit you with like 3 punches. When we think about the use of Fa Li like this, when you've got your hands on something and you escalate the posture of 1, 2, 3, move them that way and then hit them. It's a different, win within 3 moves is a different, win that little exchange within 3 moves using Fa Li. Again, it's a more advanced concept than we really need. Because if you've not been doing all the standing that have been, you can see that the classes have been structured around giving people a lot of time to spend maybe a year just working on building basic resilience for standing. I mean, we've not even really got fully into using visualization or anything like that yet. So spending a year just working on building your standing, and then later on the intermediate course we can start looking at things like that. But it's interesting conceptually, so let's share it now. Now, how does that relate to short power? Well, short power is articulated movement, that's what it is. And that's why really there's no such thing as long power. And we can begin thinking about that by thinking about some of the things that people might call short power. And I suppose the most obvious thing is Farley itself, because Farley is usually always a really short movement. And it doesn't really matter how far out the limb is extended. Even if you do like Farley from the body for a kick or something like that, and the leg's quite far out. I suppose one of the easiest ways to demonstrate that is just like with a punch from quite a long range. If my hand is very far out, nevertheless the movement of Farley is the same as if it's kind of mid-range. It's the same kind of, like my whole body just moves a tiny little bit. And we've talked about this idea before of there being like 3/3 of the shoulder, and how far does your shoulder move with the Farley, and it being a really useful way of checking. It's just kind of moving one third like that to hit the target. So if my hand is very far out, like that, the movement is still tiny in the body. It's not determined by the length of the posture or how far my limb is stuck out. So that's not long power just because my arm is out. And it's not short power just because the movement itself is very short. But I can understand why people would think in those terms that it will be like that. Actually, you've got to get your head conceptually in the level of understanding where you see that Farley is just a small movement, short movement around the body. And then it's all about how you transmit force to a certain point, and then just certain things around physiology we've talked about before, the alignment of bone structure, transmission of force versus preserving force and things like that, depending on the particular way that a configuration is stacked, all the things that we've looked at before. So we can dismiss from the discussion that what we're talking about is Farley, because we wouldn't need another term for Farley. We wouldn't need to call it short power, but we can understand why some people might think it's short power. And the next thing to think about is, well, if there's short power, is there long power? And I think this is like a very confusing thing, because you can see there that doesn't really get much longer. We could do it with a kick, and the movement is a little bit. The Farley movement itself is bigger because with a kick, the quad opens more, and the shoulder moves. The shoulder moves more. I mean, it starts coming into that third. It moves over that much with like a front kick or something like that. So the posture itself is bigger on that 3/3. 3/3 of 90 degrees. Not 3/3 of 360 degrees, just like 1, 2, 3. It's not even 90 degrees. It's whatever that is, and like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. They kind of determine most Farley. Like if you hit big forearm, hit like that, comes to this third. But if you do something like just hit with the forearm like that, it just comes to that first third there. So the kick comes a little bit further up, but it's still a very, very small movement, even though the kick itself is extending quite far. So that's not really what we might call long power. We don't need a word for that. It's still just Farley. We're much better off thinking about our other use of terminology around structure and configuration, and particularly like front kick, something like that, bone alignment because it pushes right back into the hip, or round kick, preserving force because it puts too much pressure on the muscle like that for the bone alignment to work to transmit force. We've talked about all that before. Talk about it again in a minute. It's not as confusing as I'm making it. But we do have ideas like, for example, long fist. So again, you might think, well, if you do a step like that, with a punch, that's long power. But long fist and short power are not opposites. Long fist is about range and range control, and you can see who's really good at this. Jeff Chan of MMA Shredded, the way he punches. He's kind of always got this kind of long fist thing going on. It reminds me very much of long fist. Very unusual posture. My senior student's a little bit like that as well. Really likes these lean out and long fisting that can be very, very effective. If you start saying that's long power, then the next thing you start saying is, well, if I hit from a short distance, then that's short power. And I can see how that conceptually makes sense, but again, it doesn't really work like that. I suppose, another thing to think about is like in traditional wushu, if you do something like this, kind of Nanchuan posture, that the power comes from the rotation of the, it's kind of like, it is the same concept as Farley around the axis, because Farley can cover multiple different things. It doesn't have to specifically refer to what we idiomatically use it to refer to in each one. This is Farley as well, like explosive movement like that, or punching like that. And you can think again, well, that's long power because it's long like that. But actually, no, the power comes from here, and it's quite a short movement. In fact, it's just like out of that space, it's about 2/3 like that. And it's exactly the same. If you do that, most of the power is in the right arm. Big Nanchuan double push. That's not long power just because the stance is long. The power comes from the rotation around the axis. And there's a little bit of bracing back into the back foot, of course, but that doesn't mean that, like some power comes from the floor, but when people say power comes from the floor and it implies most of the power, no, a fraction of the power comes from the floor, it's just rooted back into the floor like that. Then people start thinking, well, if I do something like that, that's short power because it's shorter, and that's the kind of thing you will see. You'll see people like pushing a pad from close range and then pushing a pad from long range, saying that's short power and that's long power. I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying you can describe those things like that, but it's how does it fit in with the overall Yiquan paradigm, and how helpful is it to help us understand these things. So it's much more useful to say that when people do something like this is different to stepping in with a big step like that and pushing. That's a different thing. If you step in like that, then you're using your body weight forward. So it's kind of body weight power like that. And also using a step, which we usually call compensatory power. We call it compensatory power always because it allows you to get more of your body weight behind the posture. Fell right off my route then. Excellent Taolu. All those years training Nanchuan falls right over. Compensatory force gets more of your body weight into a posture. But actually, if we do something like this, it's actually quite a short movement. And the step itself is quite a short step. It's bigger if you start from there, obviously, like that. But most of that is just the body falling forwards, and then at the last you push in, and that where the power comes from is a short movement. So you could call that short power, or you could just much more clearly explain that, well, this is just putting your body weight behind it, and that's just compensatory force when you do that. You don't have to do it with a step. I mean, you could fall forwards like that and punch or something like that, and just getting a little bit more of your body weight in like that. There's better ways of getting your body weight behind a punch, but in certain postures like in Xing Yiquan, using that compensatory power, because the posture itself is so short to make it. So if that's long power, well, why not if you do a big step like that, why is that not long power? Because it's really just the same kind of posture. So we really don't mean that by short power. We mean something very specific. There's no such thing really as long power in that sense when we're using the Farley paradigm. Farley is always short, but there is such a thing as articulated force, and that's what short power is. So what we're trying to do with short power is hit from close range, and the idea is that if you're close range, how do you get power? It's as simple as that. It's the paradigm that underpins all of wushu. Look at everything that everyone's doing. It's all about how do you get power, and then just different ways, like spine wave, I can't really do it, compensatory force, Farley, big swings, everything's, how do you use the laws of physics to generate force? And if you're close range like this and you want to hit, what do you do? So from a further out range, we've been practicing teleportation movement, so there's no pullback. We put all the articulated movement in the body, or we put this big swing that you might normally see, like that. We put that in the body and we change so that the punch can just go from nothing to this way like that. We put it all in the body and you can see there's no pullback, there's no swing, nothing like that. But there's other ways of getting power if we're really, really close. And it's that set of postures or ideas that we call short power. And it doesn't just refer to one way of doing it. And we'll look at, again, you can hybridize them, and there's various like combinations with other things that we can put together. But again, that's much more intermediate, and then moving into advanced concept. We just need the basic concepts at the moment. What we don't want to do is, we imagine we're really, really close and we can't get the power in that kind of teleportation punch to do it. We need a bigger gap. It breaks the rule that we were talking about before, that for Farley you only need a little bit of space. But the reason it breaks the rule is because of the other key concept that we've looked at, the difference between alignment and force preservation. That if your posture is a jab like this, that the alignment of the bone structure back into the body allows you to transmit more force into the target, just because the bones are pushing back against one another. If you do it this way, still too far, really, really close. You can do a bit, I mean, there's things you can't really see there, like my back foot came round more. Maybe you could see it on camera. My back foot came round more like that when I did it. That's telling you exactly what the science is here. Like it came round like that. And it's doing that to create more. It's doing that to create more volume, to make the posture bigger, to compensate. That's when your intent is at a more advanced level. It will, so what we call the intentional body. The intent is in the whole body, not just in your mind. It's not just your imagination or something. It's in your whole body. And your body will think, how do I make the posture bigger to get more force into the posture? And it will do things like that. It's a good learnable moment. Really easy way, using a little bit of a sliding set to just create more volume in the posture to get more power in it. But the problem I've got is when I hit the target, like the bone alignment then is going back. I mean, in this kind of straight but not straight punch, it's still going back a little bit, but it's doctrine of the mean. It's mostly, on average, going back into the shoulder, and we can transmit more force along that alignment. But when we hit round like that, there's too much going that way, and there's too much relying on the musculature. It can't transmit force in the same way, so it changes to preserving the amount of force that we've delivered. So hitting with the precise level of consistency to not lose any of the force that we've generated. That's usually less. It's usually less force. Or it can reach a certain point where it surpasses that and creates much more force, for example, with a massive swinging like that creates much more force, but it also puts massively more pressure on that muscle to preserve and control. So it's a different kind of preserving force, that you've got to control the structure and not pull your muscle out like that. And also, our idea generally in each one is it contradicts the reality of the fight in most cases, because it's too much dead time, big swing. And we just want if we're going to do that, we want a shorter movement. So all of these rules kind of have their exceptions when you reach a certain point, and then you go beyond. And it's very confusing at first if you just tell beginners all of this stuff. It's like your mind can't. So you've got to build it all brick by brick, which is what we've been doing. So it's what makes it fascinating. It's a fascinating science of physical movement. It's just like the never-ending journey of physical movement. So we want to preserve force, but the force itself is less because the alignment is less. Now, there's this kind of rule that takes place where the closer in the movement is, the more tense you can get the muscular structure by bringing it in closer, kind of thing we've talked about before. That also has a kind of force transmission itself, because by this idea of tension and relaxation in each one is profoundly misunderstood. So you've got people saying like you should just be completely relaxed. And even when we're just using visualization and mental induction, you're not completely relaxed. You're playing with the interaction of relaxation and tension. And Wang Shenjai talks about this, and all his senior students talk about it. It's not just magic power that comes from relaxation. When you hit closer, generally speaking, you tense a little bit more. You put more structural tension into the consistency of the posture, the configuration. And when you do that, because the muscles, they in effect go a little bit denser, you can transmit a little bit more force through the muscles, just like you kind of did with the density of bones. Still, it doesn't, generally speaking, compensate for the loss of power. I mean, having said that, you can do things that like a lot of people can't do, like with a posture, let's say for example the round kick, the low round kick, and where does power come from? And you can see things like 1, 2, like that, to get more power. What's that doing when somebody does Muay Thai, does that, like the step kick, 1, 2, like that? It's getting more volume into the posture to create the power like that. And then you can look at someone like, for example, Liam Harrison, who very often doesn't do things like that. He just lifts straight up into the kick. He's got a different kind of power generation. Just the fact that people like that exist tell you there's different ways of generating power that you might not have thought about. But you can also do things like, I'll try and demonstrate it. I've hurt my left ankle a little bit, but I'll try my best. Move your foot out, like that, where there's almost no, what my body's trying to do is articulate the quad back a little bit. It's a little bit of a snaky thing. Again, it's the same thing to try and create more volume in the posture. There's no magic to it. It's not, it's skill, but it's not magic powers. It's not electricity or something like that, or chi. If chi's at play, it's at play through physical posture, and body mechanics. And that's using gap Fa Li. So this kind of posture itself is about preserving power. That, because of the bone alignment, front kick, it's about power transmission. Round kick, because of the nature of the posture and the muscles being pushed back against like that, the power's going that way. When I hit, the power, the impact force is going that way. That way, it's going back down the leg. Like that, so I can get more power for a smaller movement. So it's a lot easier to do that kind of. I'm not going to do it on this because the bag isn't strong enough. But that's gap Fa Li, is a little gap, but I can do it this like articulated movement, brace Fa Li. So with my foot on like that, braced, my shin on, braced against the thing. It's a really good training exercise, like that, and just pushing like that. I see the power just bouncing me off like that. It's quite hard to control. Braced on, like that, pulling. The reason I'm bouncing back like that is I'm generating more power than can go into the bag, significantly more power than can go into the bag, so it just rebounds back into me. I just go with it and land kind of naturally. You can change it to use your somatic timing to bounce back like that from that posture. It doesn't matter. We do all of those things when we're training, so it's not we don't drill in any bad habits, but just to demonstrate what's actually going on there. And that's from pushing against the bag with my shin. And for everyone, no matter what kind of martial arts you practice, that's a really good practice exercise for building up power in the legs and understanding the difference between a gap, you've got a gap, and you can generate power like that, and race, where you just, actually the physical movement of the body is actually bigger, but you just cannot get the same level of power in like that. It's a little bit different when we come to push, because we want different kinds of effects. Like with a kick, that's not necessarily that useful, but when we push, it's much more useful because we can have our arm on someone and brace and release force and really get a really good effect from that. So it's not quite the same as with kicks. And we can do a very similar exercise, by the way, with punches, and have practiced like this a lot. So practicing around all these different ways, everything from your standing, then bringing it into like what happens when there's actually an object. I'm just putting see, I'm taking a little bit of the weight of the bag anyway, like this. I'm just practicing this way. And you'll see straight away, if you change to try and do it with a with a hook, you'll probably feel straight away the tension and pressure on the muscles there. And this also speaks to like why you should do some weight training. I mean, it is weight training in itself, and if you do it kind of slow, like that, you can build up the power to do that. But if you don't, then your ability to preserve force will be limited. And I'm telling you, you won't be able to trust yourself doing the brace postures where you have to use preserve force postures like that, like with a hook, or it could be like a push or something like that, because you won't be able to trust your muscle strength. It puts so much strength on the muscles. I'm not saying weightlifting is the only way of doing it. You know, functional strength training or something like that. You need some kind of functional strength training. I think again, this is like a misunderstanding about, you know, do you need strength training? Do you need weight training or not? I think everyone recognised. I mean, Wang Shangjai recognised very early that if a Western is twice your size, they're probably 4 times more powerful than you. No amount of weight training is going to make up that difference. And even if it did, the massive Westerner can still do weights again and become bigger than you again. So changing to different ways of using the laws of physics, i.e. around Farley and explosive movement, you know, it's a big conceptual revolution. But then everyone recognised, well, actually, of course you need strength, you know, obviously. So you very often find Yiquan instructors recommending climbing in the past. Yao Cheng Wang, for example, recommends climbing as kind of functional strength training. And I don't like climbing, I tried it once. What you've got to think of is what they mean by climbing really is functional strength training. They just didn't have, their horizons weren't broad enough back in the day. Now we understand there's all kinds of functional strength training that you can do that really speaks to this kind of movement and helps you build up the physiological capacity for it. And I know there's various posturing charlatans on the internet who say, oh, I just did Zhangzhuang and I can easily like throw MMA fighters around. I think, yeah, well, I'll believe that when I see it. I think they half believe it themselves because their mate who did 2 lessons of MMA came round and they did a bit of push-ons and managed to push him back a bit, and it's like, yeah, I can easily handle MMA fighters. It's fantasy. Pathologically enchanted life worlds that we'll talk about in the intermediate course. So all of those things add up into our kind of scientific evaluation of short power and what we need with short power. We need to articulate and phase our movement to get a bigger space. So we don't just want to hit in like that. We want to use articulation and phased movement to create more volume in our posture. And the first way we do that is with the somatic bounce that we've looked at before. And we just do it like the arm comes back and then it goes back in. So we just create the space like that. But we phase the movement so that when the arm comes back, then the shoulder goes forward. Arm comes back and then the shoulder goes forward and just whiplashes it in like that. And that's going to look something like this. Very close range. So it's still pivot root, it's just still very much the same as a normal kind of hook. The Farley is a little bit different, but it's just using this somatic bounce like that, back and forth with the shoulder like that, just a tiny little movement of the shoulder. And that's one way of using short power. It's quite a useful way as well, actually. However, think about what our principle is here. It's moving, articulating and phasing the body. And think about when I said, well, you can do this or you can do this for these 2 postures. They're by no means the only ways of articulating a push. In exactly the same way, there's different ways of articulating and phasing the body to do short power. It's an overarching concept. And it also speaks to this idea, you'll sometimes hear people talk about Yiquan teaching you to move as a unit, or Zhangzhuang particularly, teaching you to move as a unit. You've got to think about how misleading that is, because if you, from here, just like move robotically like that, and hitting, that's moving as a unit. And we can do that a little bit more when there's a distance like we talked about before. But even then, if we just move in as a unit like that, robotically, you don't really get the same power as if you articulate the movement. See how the movement is articulated and phased like that. Phasing the movement like that creates more volume. It makes the movement bigger within the same amount of time and within the same amount of space, and it gets more power. Key contradiction, well, there's so many key contradictions, isn't there, in each one, but big movement is better than small movement. Well, this is a small movement, but we're giving it more volume, let's say, rather than making it bigger by using screwing force and phased movement. So we don't really just want to move as a unit. We don't just want to be like robotic, as I'm always taking the piss out of, I know that. We don't just want to be robotic like that. That's not how power is generated. And just the act of phasing itself and slingshotting the movement like that also helps to generate more power, and everything's about getting more power into the movement. But the other way that we can use short power, the other primary way that you mostly see, is through articulating the shoulder in a circular way. So rather than just somatic bounce like that, we articulate, and it can be either way. It can be under, it can be over like that. So circular. So I'm going to hit up like that and circling the shoulder down like that. And what this is doing is creating more space in the posture. Everything kind of has its place. Like off the spot like this, you're probably better off using like a somatic timing short power. So my hand's actually touching the back here, like that, right into the throat. That's going to be enough. Remember, of course, with like small postures, like other key principle that we've talked about, that the effectiveness of the posture is very significantly determined by the strength of the target. So postures can be smaller and less powerful, but if the target they're going for is weaker, they can be super effective. Well, things might change. For example, if I want to move out of the way like this, so I'm ducking out of the way and then I want to hit back like that. I don't want to go for the duck and then like that. Well, you can see I can't even do it. I start doing it straight away. I dip my shoulder instead into the like that to get the articulated movement. So if I want to go like that, I want to pull down like that into the posture. We use the circular motion of the punch to get the short power. So we can do it like that over the top, like that. Circles to create more volume. It circles to create more volume, and then it hits in like that. And where these are going to be really, really useful, we're not going to do it today, but we're going to look at it in the intermediate course, is when we're moving with defence, and we want to move and get things like uppercuts in, and just getting the circulation of the shoulder into the posture, and then it just flows very naturally with our defensive movement like that. You know, instead of just moving across, good example, instead of just moving across and hitting like that, like articulating and phasing the movement a little bit more. We don't always have to do that, but having the possibility and the ability to do that is a really, really useful skill. And we'll look at some of those drills and how we use that practically when we come and look at the intermediate level stuff. And some of the advantages of this posture are you can keep a much closer guard, so you can articulate it before you move or the shoulder starts moving back and then straight in, rather than pulling the arm out and going in. You like that, just close down a little bit of the open defence and things. There's various different ways that we can use it. Let's think about some different examples. I don't really see it so much on this side, I suppose. Just a straight like that, straight punch in, articulate the shoulder like that, and punch in. It just creates more volume in the posture like that, and it also allows us just to solidify the structure a little bit more on the hit and preserve a little bit more force. Again, that's a little bit more advanced. And then again, hitting low, circles back a little bit like that and hits it like that. So the way to practice these, first of all, is just very relaxed, straight, kind of straight. You can do them off a jab and things like just practicing pulling back like that. Just practicing pulling back, hitting like that. You usually wouldn't do it on a jab or something like that. But it has little things like if you've got your hand on someone else's hand, someone's arm like that, and you can pull the arm back and push it. It interlinks like a Lego brick into postures like that. So for all of these, just practice articulating the shoulder both ways. 1, 2, from close range, and then you can bring them yourself into just thinking about how do we articulate short power from defensive moves. But we will be looking at that in the intermediate class. So for now, this is just a beginner's explanation, just making some concepts clearer. Always some people can move on faster than others, so it just makes some things clearer, clears up some things around short power, and we'll look at it again when we come back to the intermediate course. I hope that was helpful. One love. See you in the next one.